Let's get it. Let's get it. Let's go. Welcome to the Big Idea to Bestseller podcast. I got a special guest today. If we want to talk about how do you write a book, how do you get the structure, how do you get the discipline to create the freedom, then you are in for a treat because we have Cory Hott in the house. And Cory Hott is a ghostwriter, book editor, and humorist. But more importantly, he's a storyteller. His nonfiction essays have appeared in magazines, literary journals, and trash cans across the country. He has helped more than 150 authors publish more than 175 books. Sheesh! And in 2019, he co-founded Hott and Hadley Writing Consultancy with E. Hadley Pasella to help coaches, entrepreneurs, and entertainers transform their stories into best-selling books. Now, before I bring Cory onto the stage here, I just want to share a little something with you. I was introduced to Cory just a little while back, and since we have chatted, this dude has just delivered. This dude knows his stuff. He knows exactly what authors need, especially if you're writing for the very first time. So, Cory, welcome to the Big Idea to Bestseller podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So let's get into this. You've done, according to your bio, 175 plus books, right? That's
Oh yeah.
so many books, right? That's more than some people have ever read in their life. And so you've been around for a while. Can you talk to us about what are the key elements that make a great nonfiction book?
Yeah, there are so many good ones, and I think at the end of the day, the two most important qualities are authenticity. So you really have to know your shit. And so people will want to write a book. So let's say, for example, you're, I don't know, a personal finance coach, and some people want to go off and write a transformation book about how to up level your life, and that's nice. Everyone wants to up level their lives, but you have to be more specific about it. If you're a finance coach, teach finance things, and that'll help people level up their lives. Taking a very broad general stance never works. And I think the second most important factor is storytelling. And you don't have to be a storyteller either. You can hire a coach or get a good editor who can help you figure out how to be a good storyteller. But you have to have stories in your books because at the end of the day, that's what we all want. That's why we read, is to be told a story. And that's the best way to learn a story too,
Man,
or to learn anything as through a story.
yeah, and those are some good things. Like way to kick this thing off with just like pure fuego, right? Authenticity, pitching down, telling stories, right? Like that's what it takes. And we try to overcomplicate this sometimes
Hmm.
because it's such a big dream, and because we've put books on such a pedestal as our society, that we sometimes need to boil it down. And look, all you're doing is you're just sharing what you're really good at already in the form of a story on paper. Like that's
Yep.
really what it comes down to. And I make it seem so simple. And again, writing a book's a challenge. It's hard work and it takes time and effort and discipline.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, you're teaching what you already know. You're helping somebody with their problems. And you're
Yeah.
doing it in a way where they get to know you and your personal experiences. So I just love how you broke that down to get things started. So tell us this, Cory. How did writing and ghostwriting and editing become your forte? Like, have you always wanted to be involved in the book space, or how did it come about?
Yeah, no, I actually started going to school for painting. And very quickly I was told I was not a painter by a professor, thank God, who pulled me aside and said, please do not become a painter. And I said, yes, sir. And so I switched over to writing, and I went off into journalism, regular journalism, magazine journalism. I had a lot of fun doing that, but I wasn't making as big of a difference as I thought I could. Ended up moving to DC, got involved with a book publishing house, and got involved with nonfiction books, particularly personal development books. Um, and I loved reading those, especially as a kid. And my parents would make fun of me because I would sit there and read like How to Change Your Brain in 90 Days. Because I was like, listen, this what's going on now with me is not okay, and I need to better this. Um, yeah, and so that's how I got into them. And since then I've seen the power of them. You know, my authors will come to me and tell me these amazing stories about how someone approached them at a book signing and told them that their book changed their lives, convinced them to divorce that man or lose 40 pounds or whatever it is. And I mean, if you can have that ripple effect with just one book, and I mean, these people, these authors that I've worked with historically have not been, seasoned writers, by which I mean they are not experienced. This is their first book. They've never even written a blog post. So if these people can have that ripple effect in the world, that's incredible. And that's the difference that we all want to see made.
And dude, your story is so cool. Like, yes, sir, not a painter. Like it's awesome that you were able and willing to take feedback and be self-aware enough to recognize what you needed to do next. And like that's your story, right? And I'll never forget, I had written my first book and a college had picked it up as required reading. And I already thought, I was like, oh, I made it. Like, this is the coolest thing.
Yeah.
I get to the syllabus and my name's in the syllabus. I'm like, I used to never buy those books because I didn't need it. You know what I mean? And I'll never forget because I was on campus going to be doing a keynote for that class. And I had somebody come up before I was even there. I parked and I was walking in, and literally someone stopped me and they go, "Are you Jake Kelfer?" And I kind of was like, wait, like, should I know this person, right? Like,
Yeah.
naturally, should I know this person? And I was like, yeah, I'm Jake. Like, what's going on? And they were like, oh, I read your book and I loved it. Like, anytime I have an interview, I pull out your book and I read it again. And when you talk about that ripple effect, as an author, that was one of the greatest feelings I've ever
Hmm.
had through this writing process. And so we have that power as first time writers to share what we know in a way that can really impact people and change the course of their entire life. Just like you got impacted by books and it changed the course of your life. So thank you for sharing that. And, as we go through today, man, like I want to get into some good stuff. All right. Like
Let's do
people
it.
listen to this podcast because they don't want the fluff, they want the stuff. All right.
Hmm.
So let's talk about this book structure. All right. You've done 175 books, you've read hundreds of other books, you've been around thousands of books. What is the best way to structure a nonfiction book?
It's a really good question. And I think there are millions of ways to do it. But there's one way that I've found that's pretty formulaic, and you can still have fun with it. What I'm about to say is a very easy structure that you can sort of almost plug and play. But that doesn't mean that it has to be boring. That doesn't mean that it's got to be very, formulaic to the reader and to you, the writer. You can still have fun with it. So number of chapters does not matter, but there are 5 chapters that are very important, I think, uh, in terms of their placement. So chapter 1 should always be talking to directly to the reader and speaking to the reader's problem. That main intention for the reason in which you or for which you wrote the book. So if that is, I want to help people lose 40 pounds, that's your intention. That first chapter should be about the struggle that your reader is going through right now before they've received help. Um, so you're talking about how that problem is affecting their life. In terms of on a very broad scale, they probably feel a lot of shame and guilt that they think that they're overweight. It could go even more uh, granular to, you know, I'm having fights with my husband because I'm so ashamed about my weight, and I think that he hates me because I'm fat. So speaking to that, and this is very important, you have to keep yourself as the author out of this chapter because everyone wants to hear about themselves. We're all a little narcissistic at the end of the day, and especially people who are picking up self-help and personal development books or whatever the book is. Um, they are picking up because they want to solve their problem, not because they want to hear how amazing you are. You're going to get to tell them eventually, but speak to them a little bit. Allow that empathy to come through. And so once you speak to the problem and let them know, I know what you're going through, because that's really what that chapter is you saying, I get it. I've worked with these people before, just like you. I know the problem. I can help. And then chapter 2, that's where you get to talk about yourself and prove to the reader why you are the only person or the best possible person to help them solve their problem. It's sort of like a cover letter in a way, except way more fun. So you get to sort of tell your story in terms of the problem that you're helping to solve. This is not your chance to tell everyone about how you were born in a log cabin and every detail leading up to present day. This is the chance to tell every detail in relation to the problem and how that helped you to now solve that problem. So if you have coached 500 people, great chance to mention that. If you have certain degrees, if you have your business structured right now, if you've been on 200 stages, people are going to want to know that. So then the third chapter at the beginning of the book should be about what the book is going to be about. You know, there's that old saying, tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them again. That's your chance to tell them again what you're going to tell them. So you're going to want to sort of outline the book. I think I've told you before a story about how I was on a very, very terrible journey from DC to Los Angeles, and I didn't buy the plane tickets. I had someone else buy them for me, and ended up having like 4 layovers. It was the worst, and I didn't know. When I travel, I don't want to look at anything. I don't want to know about itineraries. I just want to show up and go. And so I show up at DC, land in O'Hare, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, must be a layover. And then I get on a plane, next plane's to Albuquerque, and I'm like, where am I going? And every single time, and I'm getting more nervous with each of these layovers, thinking, am I ever going to end up in LA, or am I going to end up getting like sex trafficked? And so that's sort of what your chapter 3 is you have to let the reader know the journey you're going to take them on, because they're already going to have heightened anxiety. This is the way of just sort of bringing it down, saying, I got you. This is why you should trust me. This is the path I'm going to take you on. And it also gives people the chance, it's very rare, but it gives them the chance to, if they decide, you know what, that process isn't for me, to close the book. Because if you allow them to keep reading and this process is not for them, they're going to be angry with you and they're not going to like you as an author.
And let me
So
here real quick, Corey, because
yeah,
that's a really good point. And then I want to do a quick little recap of those first three before we keep going. Not everybody is going to like your book. Not everybody's going to become a customer. Not everybody's going to be the biggest fan, and that's okay. All right, we have to
yes,
be okay with this and understand that we aren't the best person for everybody, but we will give everybody a chance to see us as we could be the best person. And
yeah,
I tell people this, for anyone that's listening, you got to understand this simple truth. You do not need every person to love you or your book, or you don't need
mhm,
every person to like you or your book. You just need the right people to love you and your book, and that will change your life. Okay, so let's recap
mhm.
here before we go on to these back half. I want to make sure that we're telling them again, and telling them again, right? So the first chapter, you like to break it down as, what is the problem, essentially.
Mhm. Yep.
Get into your ideal reader's mind, talk about them. They should be thinking, oh my gosh, like he or she, they know exactly what I'm going through. Like, oh my gosh, like I got to keep reading, because you're just talking about their issue. The second chapter is like, okay, I remember when I had this issue, and here's what I've done about it, and here's why I'm the person that can teach you, right? Kind of like that storytelling
Mhm.
of yourself, but only what's relevant for the reader at that time. Am I understanding that correctly so
Yep.
far?
Absolutely.
And then the third chapter is basically like, look, here's what the rest of this book is going to be about. It's going to cover XYZ topics. And if you don't like that, that is okay. And
Yeah.
I may even include this in my next book, where I may even say, if you aren't excited about what's to come, please go ahead and set this book down or email me and we'll refund you. You know what I mean? Like you can take it to whatever extreme, but I love
Yeah.
the flow here, and how you're doing it, because it's helping people who are listening be like, oh, I can do that. I can break
Yeah.
it down. All right, you keep going.
Yep.
You keep going. Enough of me. Let's keep hearing you.
Yeah. No, it really is that simple. So after you have your chapter 3, you tell them what you're going to tell them. Now's your chance to sort of break into whatever your process is. If you've got, I don't know, if you're an acupuncturist and you've got a certain process that you teach people to do at home whenever they don't want to have to pay big money to come see you, it's your chance to basically throw that into the book. And each chapter should be a specific step. And you don't have to have a process. If listening to this, you're like, well, I don't have a process. I don't have like a 7-step plan to help someone get their retirements in order. Um, that's fine. You can sort of build one out as you're writing, or alternatively, just throw all the wisdom that you have at the wall in obviously a very structured way that makes sense. So that's a very large part of the book planning process. But so you'll have chapter 1, You know, sitting down and taking a look at your finances. Chapter 2, I don't know, I'm not a finance person, so this is hard for me, but you get the point. So each of the chapters you build out. And like I said, doesn't really matter how many chapters. I am a very big fan of the school of thought of keep it sweet as possible, short and sweet. Because people typically who are picking up a book because they've got a problem, they want it solved, don't want to read a Stephen King size novel. That will give them so much more anxiety and they will be ready to throw your book out the window. So, as short as you possibly can. While still giving all the tools and techniques so that the person can solve the problem on their own. If you are writing the book as a lead magnet, um, and you want people, the readers, to eventually reach out to you and work with you as their coach, or hire you to be on a stage, what have you, um, you know, of course, like I said, you want them to reach out, but you still want to give them the tools to do it by themselves. You never want to skimp. That being said, give as much information as you can, um, in order to convince them to reach out and work with you. So you've got your main, I call them the process chapters. And then there are two very important chapters that go at the very end. The second to last should be, I call it the issues chapter. So it's sort of like when you go to a doctor and they prescribe you a new medicine, they're always going to tell you the side effects of that medicine. This is your chance to tell them the side effects. If they try to implement the steps and tools and techniques that you've taught themselves, how or what are they going to run into and how can they overcome that? Because you do want people to be successful, even if they don't reach out to you, because then that's another win in your corner. Just because they didn't say, hey, here's all my money, let me come work with you, they still are going around hopefully singing your praise because you helped them solve that problem. So tell them all of the problems that they're going to run into and how to overcome that. And they're going to thank you for that. And then your second to last chapter is your conclusion chapter. There are a few important things that go in this. First is very similar to chapter 3. You'll want to recap everything that you've taught, because hopefully at that point you have spewed so much brilliance over these pages that the reader is going to feel like they just came out of a tornado. They're going to say, whoa, that was insane. So give them the most important topics that you covered. And then I always recommend telling a client story in this chapter. Client stories are so important to tell throughout the entire book. Backtracking, you probably should tell at least one client story per chapter, because those sort of let the reader know, one, that you know what you're doing, you've been successful before, they can trust you. But then two, it lets them know that what they can expect if they decide to work with you. They can, oh, wow, I wonder if, Dennis can do that for me. And then, of course, like I said earlier, stories are just fun. People love them. They're great teaching techniques, and hopefully you can teach them how to solve the problem in that story. So in the last chapter, I recommend telling a client story of a client who you were successful with. So if you helped that person lose 40 pounds and now they're off living their best life, tell us how happy they are right now. That's going to be so inspiring and uplift somebody to go, you know what? If Tiffany could lose her 40 pounds, I can lose my 40 pounds too. I'm going to lose 50 pounds just to show Tiffany. And then, any final parting wisdom that you have, anything that, you've held off on saying, so you're sure where it goes, it's usually a good place for in the last chapter. And then your hope for the reader, I hope that this book has changed your life, that it's inspired you to go out and, power through that divorce and live your best life. Short and sweet, one paragraph. That's all. And that's the simplest way I have found to structure a book.
Let's go, Cory. Let's go. So let me go through it all over again. All right. Let's
Let's
just
do it.
go down because you gave so much good stuff. I want to take it back. Chapter 1 is going to be the issues that they're currently facing. What is the problem?
Yes.
Chapter
Mhm.
2 is why are you the best person to solve this problem and be the author of this book, right? Chapter 3 is here's what this book is going to be about. Really laying it out for them and letting them make a decision at this point. Do I want to continue or do I not? And we're okay with either of those answers. Then the meat of the book. The
Mhm.
meat of the book is your signature process. If you have a coaching program or a keynote or a course, this is where you lay in your modules, your lessons, etc. If you are building it as you go and maybe you're using the book to create your stuff, this is where you organize and say, hey, if I was helping this person, what would be the order that I would teach this in, right? Then after those chapters, that's going to be the meat of your book. Then you're going to have the side effects chapter. And that's kind of going to be like, hey, now you've done this, but here's what could happen next, right? Kind of setting the stage for
Mhm.
that, right? Kind of giving
Yeah.
them a look into the future. And then the final chapter is the conclusion. And the conclusion recaps the most important points, gives a client story, and kind of lets them know, hey, here's where you go next. Is that
Mhm.
accurate? Did I
Yep,
set
exactly.
up?
And while you were saying that, it reminded me of, if when it comes to structuring those process chapters, the big beef chapters, think about if you're sitting in front of a client, how would you teach somebody to solve this problem? That's generally how you're going to want to structure the book. Of course, sometimes things change, but generally speaking, do it the same way you've been doing it for however many years, decades, the entire life that you've lived.
Okay, so this is good, and I'm gonna get into it because people that are listening are be like, okay, now I see the bigger picture here, right? I see exactly what's in front of me. But let's talk about these difficult chapters. Like, let's talk about these chapters, like how to actually write them.
Hmm.
We talked about the book structure, but is there
Hmm.
a chapter structure that you like to follow? Because I
Oh
know
yeah.
that when I write or when I read, there's always things that are the same, and until you're aware of it, you just read as if you're reading. But there's always
Hmm.
story, lesson, message, call to action. Story, lesson, story, message, story, call to action. So I'm curious, do you have a basic chapter framework that you like to follow when it comes to writing out books?
Yes. So I'm going to tell you what I told you before, which is, once again, tell them what you're going to tell them. Um, Follow that structure on a more broad level. You'll be solid. So start off with an introductory paragraph in which you say, in this chapter, I will teach you XYZ. Of course, you can have fun with it. You can be more creative, but that's the most basic way to say it. And then I recommend going into a story. Now, if you're a pro and you can handle this, by which I mean, if you're having fun on the page, you can flip those two. I think it's more fun to start with a story. I think that's more of an expert level move. But if not, introduction and then story, client story, relevant to that particular step or whatever it is. Um, and how you helped solve that problem. Now, it's very important in these client stories to include yourself as the coach, because I've seen a lot of authors go wrong where they tell a client story and they say, you know, Dennis went out and lost his 50 pounds, and he did this, and this, and they never mention what they did to help solve that problem. So make sure you include yourself there, and it's going to be a little scary. You're not going to want to put yourself out there. No one really does, but validate that fear, get over it, and then do it. And so after you tell your story, then you go into the actual step, what you would say to a client if they were sitting right in front of you. Um, and the actual tools and techniques, very similar to this podcast. You want to make sure that you are giving them actual tangible steps, not, if you believe you can lose 50 pounds, you can lose 50 pounds. That's lovely, but that's not going to help me lose weight. And that's certainly not going to please my scale. So give them the actual tools. And then, if you're really feeling generous, another client story. And then ending on a call to action, and then a conclusion in which you recap the most important information. Tell them what you're going to tell them one last time. And I think if you follow that, it's easy. You give all of your stuff away, you can keep it short and sweet. Yeah.
So how do you close that chapter, right? You mentioned the conclusion, kind of tell them again. And people may start to say, well, how much should I be telling them again? What does that look like? Is that a final just paragraph being recapping everything? Or how would you kind of describe that final close of that chapter to really send people on their way?
Yeah. I would say go back to your chapter intention. So each chapter that you have, you're going to want to write a one sentence explanation about what that chapter is. I call that the intention. Um, Go back to the intention and basically restate the intention with just a little bit more information and more specifics about what you taught. So if that chapter is, calorie counting, can't remember if that's a no-no anymore. Some people are out of that train of thought. Um, then you would say, in this chapter, I taught you about how to count your calories appropriately and the correct number to strive for by using this technique and whatever that technique was. And I mean, it can be as short as one sentence. It can be as long as two paragraphs. I think that's a bit of a stretch. One paragraph, mwah, sweet spot.
Do you have to, when you're writing a nonfiction book, how important is it to connect one chapter to the next, right? Do you need to leave it
Mm.
on a cliffhanger? Do you need to tease what's coming? Or is it as simple as, look, you restate the chapter intention, you kind of finish it up, and then boom, you move on to the next chapter.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts from all of the books that you've read and seen and written?
Yeah, I think tying it up and moving on to the next chapter um, is the easiest way. Leaving it on a cliffhanger is fine. I think that's fun. I think if you're an expert or you're having fun on the page, go for it. And that's another important thing to highlight is as you're writing, just keep flowing. You know, don't stop and think, oh, I could have rewritten or I could have written that better. Just keep going and save it for the editing because there will always be times in the future to make it better. So yeah, no, cliffhanger works perfectly fine. My issue with cliffhangers sometimes is that they it sort of lets the topic linger a little bit too long, and people who are reading these personal development books are like, okay, done, got it, got that step, let's move on to the next thing. So sometimes it, you know, sort of sits and wafts. So finish it up, tie it up as beautifully as you can, and move on quickly because these readers will think that you are God if you can do that.
Everything that you're talking about is just like I'm like thinking in my head. I got a million ideas. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I need to simplify this process even further than like I already have for a lot of our clients. And one of the things that I would love to know from you is you mentioned this at the very beginning of the episode, but I want to dig more specific into it, which is how important and how helpful is it as you're writing to make sure that you have a clear niche and an ideal reader
Mm.
before you begin the writing phase.
It is so important. I would, if someone were to come to me and tell me that they did not have that information, they were trying to write a book, I would tell them to stop what they were doing and go back and figure it out. Or call me in like 7 years when you finally finish the book, because that's when you're going to finish the book. It's so important because, you know, everything that I'm saying is coming from a very specific mindset, which is a reader first mindset. I'm not thinking about my authors. I'm not thinking about publishing houses or who's, you know, bookstores who are going to help you hawk it off. I'm thinking about the reader because at the end of the day, that is the most important person. It's the reason you're writing the book is hopefully to help people and better the world. So every move that I make as a writer and editor is thinking, is this the best possible move for a writer? Or I'm sorry, for the reader. So having that reader in mind, it will make your life so much easier. You know, when people talk about writer's block, especially when it comes to these types of books, the reason they get writer's block is because they have forgotten for whom they're writing the book. So knowing who that person is very specifically, that one single person. And I get a lot of pushback on this. They say, well, can it be two people? Can it be 5 or 100 people? No, it must be one person. I know that that sounds terrible and difficult and like I'm being mean and bullying you. No, it has to be that one person because, you know, imagine trying to teach two people one very specific process and then person two goes, well, that's not the way I want to do it. I don't agree with what you're saying. There goes the entire book into chaos. So pick that one person. And then also, you know, sort of like we were talking about earlier, remember your niche. Know what your niche is and embrace that. People think that that's pigeonholing sometimes. Um, but knowing your audience and speaking on a very granular, specific level will make you popular and make your work appeal to the masses. People think it's the opposite. You want to appeal to the masses as you're writing, and that's what's going to do it. If you take a look at Oprah, and you know, for example, some of her very first episodes, every episode really, she's talking on each different episode about a very specific problem. And look at all of the hundreds of millions of people who would watch those episodes and think, oh my God, that's me. I need that advice from that expert that she was interviewing. So lean into your niche. It may be uncomfortable, and that's fine. Validate that fear or the nervousness or whatever that emotion is. Say, you know what, right now I'm feeling scared because I think if I write to a specific person, that's not going to make my book successful.
Mm.
And then once you say that, it sort of brings you back down to a baseline, calm down. Okay, I can tackle this now, because that's kind of a ridiculous thought that this will not appeal to the masses, because actually I am pretty badass at what I do. And now I can write this book. So validate it and move on.
And that's where the repetition, right, really comes into play here is once you know that person, what happens is your messaging becomes more clear. And then it becomes easier for you to tell. It becomes easier for you to remember the stories. It becomes easier for you to remember the experiences. That makes it easier to start writing. Then as you're writing, you know clearly more, even more importantly, what are the things that I need to share over and over and over again? Because here's the truth. People, if everybody learned everything the first time, most people would be out of business. It's not like we're all telling you all new information, coaches, entrepreneurs, like we're not all teaching you different information or new
Yeah.
information. We're all teaching something similar, but in a different way that is unique to how we learned it,
Mm,
our experiences. And so that's why it's super important to repeat it. Look, there are times in our life where we won't understand something until we're meant to understand it. And so maybe it's not the first time in the chapter that you say it. Maybe it's not even the second time. But maybe it's in the conclusion when you finally are going back that the fifth time, the fourth time, you've seen the same damn thing that you as the
mhm.
reader are like, I get it.
Yes.
Get it. But answer this though, because I can hear people pushing back right now. It's like, I feel like I'm just repeating myself throughout this entire book. Like, is that still valuable content? So, answer to this, Cory, is for all the people that think like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be repeating myself so much.
Mhm.
Is that okay, or do I need to say it in a different way? What do you tell those people? Because that I know is a hesitation for people to repeat their stuff.
Yeah. What I tell those people is, it seems repetitious to you because you have been living this content for so long. You know this like the back of your hand. So, of course, it's going to feel repetitious to you. To your reader, someone who is hopefully in that moment meant to learn this information as if brand new, this is going to be so eye-opening to them. And that repetition, if you do it well and you do it right, they won't even realize that you're repeating yourself, because like you said, you can switch it up, you can say it differently. I would recommend that you say it differently and not verbatim. it They're going to get to the end, and by repeating it so often, it's going to sort of bang it and solidify it into their heads. And so then years down the road, they can be walking around going, oh my god, I remember that book by Jake, and he kept saying over and over again how important it was to do X in order to achieve Y. And they will hopefully never realize that it was because you repeated yourself an ungodly number of times.
Well, and I think of myself when I read books, and look, as much as I'd like to say I can retain every little piece of information, every little book, there are few books that you remember that much from. And even
Yeah.
in those books, you remember a few key things that stick with you. And those key things are the things that were probably repeated the most in the book that to the author, they were probably like, damn, I'm saying this a lot. But to the reader, that's the thing that sticks with them 5 years down the road. That's the thing that changes their life. That's the thing that inspires them to do something different. So if you're listening to this and you're wanting to write this book, like write it, repeat it, and tell them again. I'm just gonna keep saying that again because it's so important. So the final thing that I want to ask you here, and then we're gonna get you connected with everybody, is let's say we follow your structure for the book,
Mhm.
we follow your chapter structure, we're feeling good, we've produced something we're really proud of. How do we make sure that we're writing this book that helps with our goals beyond the book? So if we do want to use it for a coaching practice or to get
Mm.
more clients or to get booked on stages or whatever our reason is beyond just writing the actual book, how do we make sure throughout this entire process of following your structure that we have that goal implemented as we go?
Stay connected with your reader. They get in contact with them in whatever capacity that means. And this is a fun little trick that a lot of personal development authors use at the very end of the book. And sometimes it's at the front, placement. It's up for debate with me. In my experience, the back of the book seems best, but I've heard of success stories from the front. It's one single page at the very end or front in which you say, thank you so much for reading the book. You give them a genuine thank you, because it is pretty impressive if someone has gotten all the way through your book. So thank you so much for reading. As a special gift from me, it's not much, but I'd like to stay in contact with you. Give them something, whether that's stay in contact with me, Sign up for my newsletter. You can have the first episode of my masterclass for free if you follow this link. Whatever it is to get in contact with them. And then once you have their information, you can reach out and say, I saw that you read my book and that means the world to me. How did it help you? And then start that conversation and hear the stories. And not only is it going to be moving for you because they're going to say, well, I went out and I was inspired to lose my first 5 pounds. So you're going to feel even better. But then it figures out how you can further help those people and say, well, you lost your first 5. How about we work together and I help you lose 25 more? How does that sound? And then, of course, start the work with them. It's sort of salesy, but it works. And I don't like to think of it as being salesy. I think of it as helping people who clearly wanted the help. If they didn't want your help, they would not have picked up the book. So to me, it's not sales, it's further bettering the world.
And I love how you frame that, because the way that I talk about it with all of our clients who are writing books, because that's critical that you connect to them, is I call it inviting them to the party. Okay.
Mm.
And the reason I say that is because so many people are like, oh, you're going to put a pitch thing in there. And it's like, damn right I am, but it's not, I'm
Yeah.
not pitching, I'm not being obnoxious. What I am doing is inviting you to my party. And
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but I've never been upset to be invited to a party. And I'll tell you what, the better that invitation is, or the better that party is, I'm more
Hmm.
likely to say yes to that thing. And so when I tell our authors who get to the stage, I'm like, give them the greatest invitation you can. All right. And
Hmm.
in a book, you're not going to have, all the cool decor on your invitation. So you better make sure that the party that you're inviting them to is legit. So that's a lead magnet. Make it awesome. If it's a
Hmm.
video, make it unbelievable. If it's something that you
Yeah.
normally charge for and you give it to them for free because they finished the book, like, do something big. Invite them
Hmm.
to the party, and then they're going to be
Yeah.
like, damn, where's my limo at? Right?
Yes.
Oh, you know what? I'm getting dressed before and I'm coming, and then they're prepared to have a great time. You've created an experience, and now we're having a blast. So,
Hmm.
how do we connect with you, Cory? This has been absolutely unbelievable. How do we connect with you? How do we continue to learn from you, and all these good
Yes.
jazz?
Yeah. Go to our website, hotthadley.com, HOTTHADLEY.com. You can follow us on Instagram. I think I'm on Twitter. I haven't used it in 2 years. But across all platforms, it's at Free Corinthia, FREECORINTHIA.
Awesome, awesome. So you guys make sure to go check out Cory out on social media. He's got some great content. And if you like this episode, like, screenshot your biggest takeaway and post it on social media. And we'd love to see that, because just like when you're going to be finishing your book here soon, and you're going to be committed to your book and you're going to finish it, and you're going to have people reaching out to you, we also love to know that our work is impacting you as well, because we show up here, we want to make sure that we're delivering you guys some incredible value. And I know that Cory just brought the house down. I mean, this was absolutely dynamic. So if you really enjoyed this episode, let us know on social. We'd love to connect. And if you're somebody who has been thinking about writing a book and you're like, oh, now I can do it. If you want to write it, but you want a little help, reach out to me. We'll get you going and we'll get you started in our program if you're a good fit. But if you're like, you know what, I'm super busy, but I want someone else to write it, I want to ghostwrite it, we work with Cory to help bring books to life, okay? And so Cory ghostwrites, we team up, we help you go from start to finish, and so that you can have the book you've always dreamed of. So if you want more information on that, make sure to connect with us. Look, we're here to help your book get written. That's what we want to see. We want to see you have success. So thank you so much for tuning in. And Cory, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate
Of
you.
course. Thank you so much. It's been fun.
All right,
Let's
everybody.
keep the
We'll
party
talk to you
going.
on the next one.